Today, we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by Dr. C. Nicole Mason. Dr. Mason holds a distinction among the first in her family to graduate from both high school and college, a testament to her personal drive and resilience. Her journey from challenging early circumstances is chronicled in her book, Born Bright, A Young Girl's Journey from Nothing to Something in America. Dr. Mason pursued higher education with a clear focus on understanding and addressing societal inequalities. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Howard University and furthered her academic pursuits at the University of Maryland, where she attained both a Master of Arts and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Government and Politics, a significant achievement in that Dr. Mason was the first Black woman to specialise in political philosophy within the University of Maryland's program history. Complementing her advanced degrees, she also earned a Women's Studies certificate from the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies, University of Maryland. Dr. Mason's career has been marked by impactful leadership roles and significant contributions to public discourse. She is the founding director of Future Forward Women, a legislative exchange and policy network operated within the New York Women's Foundation. Dr. Mason's significant impact has been recognized through numerous accolades, including being named one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine, one of Glamour magazine's 100 influential women leaders, and one of Washingtonians magazine's 500 most influential people in Washington, D.C. And she's been kind enough to join us today. So thank you, Dr. Mason. You're incredibly welcome. And I look forward to learning lots from you as we talk. So as I was saying, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Mason. She's been kind enough to give us some of her incredibly busy time. So I want to get straight into it, if that's okay, and ask you about your, I guess, your early years. So you've read a book, a very compelling book called Born Bright, which really goes into your early life. And I wondered if you could perhaps share an experience or a challenge from your formative years that helped shape your understanding of what inequality really means and the importance of being able to have a voice that perhaps represents those people that don't have the voice.
So thank you for having me. That's a really great question, and how I would answer it is not so much, and there are many things that shaped my formative years, but I want to talk about how I came to understand and put into context my early experiences of poverty and episodic homelessness. So I am the first in my family to graduate high school, to go to college, and to earn a PhD. And when I arrived to Howard University in Washington, D.C., it was the first time I had been on an airplane in my life. And I remember taking a political science course. And up to that point, I didn't understand anything about social inequality. I didn't have any language for my experiences as a young Black girl in America and what I'd seen growing up. And in that class, they started talking about, we were doing a segment on social inequality and talking about social safety net programs, and talking about welfare and food subsidy programs like food stamps, and debating in class about whether or not we should provide for poor people. Now, up to that point, didn't consider myself poor. I had never thought of myself as a poor person, but all the programs that they were describing were programs that I used as a child. And I remember feeling really embarrassed and a lot of shame during that conversation, because they were talking about me and they were talking about my family, but they were talking about them as poor people and debating on whether or not they deserved help, And in that moment, I could have continued to feel embarrassed and continue to feel shame, but instead I really leaned into that conversation. And so, I had new language for my experiences. I had language, like language for class disparities and social inequalities, racism, and social programs. And it really changed the trajectory of my life. Like from that moment on, I wanted to understand it, but not only did I want to understand it, I wanted to do something about it. And, that experience in that classroom that day or over those couple few days really um, shaped who I became in the world, but also I had a lot more compassion for people in my family, but also the communities that I knew so well, because for a long time I really didn't understand why we had so little compared to other communities that seemed to have much more than we did.
It's fascinating to me that I understand first person in the family to do a PhD, because that's still a special thing to do and quite unusual. But what do you think it was about you that made you decide to finish high school, college, masters, PhD? Because, like I said, there's no history in your family of doing that. You weren't from, your parents both weren't doctors or academics. So why did you decide, no, I am going to finish high school, college, etc.? What was it that drove you to do that?
So I want to say that I don't think there was anything extraordinary about me. What I know and what continues to be true is that there were plenty of young people in my family and in my community who were just as smart as I was, um, um, and had just as much potential, but didn't have the support, the opportunities, the scaffolding, but also the grit and the tenacity
Yeah.
To get out or see something different. So for me, it was the teachers that I experienced, who from the very early on, from I think 5 years old, when I was attending, again, a government sponsored preschool program, who told me I was smart and that I had potential. And if I had nothing else, that is what I held on to, and being able to exercise that potential in an academic setting. Now, these are schools from birth until I went to college. These were schools that were failing schools. So these weren't schools with the best books or a lot of
Mhm.
resources. But in that environment, I was still able to excel. And I had people helping me along the way. How I learned how to apply for college, I learned by watching the white students in my classroom, and I just did and mimicked what they did. Now, that was a very hard thing for me to do, because when I went home every day, that wasn't my family life. Nobody was talking about school. Nobody was talking about college. And so I had to reconcile my home life and also my school life,
Mm.
and was very determined to do so. But I want to say that having to do that extra work, having that tenacity and having that grit, I actually don't think that it should be that way. Nobody should have to work that hard um, to get out of poverty or to be set on the right path. And I think for most kids, coming living in a impoverished environment, that's really hard to do. But I'm also very stubborn, and I'm also kind of difficult. So I was up for it, but I just don't think that should ever have to be the case.
No. It is amazing, isn't it, how much of an impact being told that you're smart or can do things by a teacher at a young age has on us. I can still remember one of my teachers when I was even 6 or 7. I have very few memories of when I was young, but 6 or 7 praising something I'd done in class, and it just changed how I felt about everything. Really, wow! So I can do this, and exactly you say. So it makes it distressing in a way when I look at how the education system in the UK, and I know in the US, struggles for funding, and it's much, much more difficult. Class sizes get bigger and bigger, and it's harder and harder to become a good teacher. And it becomes such a challenge when there's things that impact us at a young age. I mean, you talked about some of the safety net programs like Head Start and a few other things, and I wondered what your reflections are on where they sit today and whether they are addressing the needs of families and individuals.
So, in the US, as you know, we're having a very difficult time, and there are proposed significant cuts to programs like, many of the programs I depended on as a child, Medicaid,
Mm-hmm.
the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and Head Start. Those are all programs I vividly remember relying on as a child. And Head Start gave me, no pun intended, my start. Like, that's where I learned that I was smart. That's where I felt loved and supported. And, I would be on a different path had I not had access to that early education opportunity that was provided to both me and to my brother. And so it's heartbreaking to see that um, Head Start for sure is on the chopping block,
Yeah.
because I do think it provides an opportunity for kids just like me, who, you know, the deck, the cards, whatever you want to say, are, were stacked against me and us from the very beginning. And so it feels very unfortunate, and I do feel like we're heading to a place where there's already deep chasms in terms of inequality, and those chasms and those gaps will, only deepen with the proposed cuts. Um, um, the proposed cuts that are pending at the federal level.
Mm.
And what makes me most sad is that I think that that is the intention. The intention is to cut off that bridge, that lifeline, that opportunity to kids like me, and that I think is very tragic.
Yeah. One thing I find very confusing is you have individuals that are both born in a state of poverty, and they have challenges in the family, and then there might be drugs in the family, alcohol abuse, or whatever. And I think particularly of JD Vance, so the vice
Hmm.
president.
Hmm.
I read his book Hillbilly Elegy, and I thought,
Hmm.
wow, that's Appalachian Mountains. That's a hell of a life to sort of grow up in. But then his view on how to fix things is almost the polar opposite you would expect for somebody that's come from that background. And what's what is it that the very conservative part of the Republicans say is the solution then, or is it just not something that they're focused on addressing?
So let me tell you my JD Vance story. So
Mhm.
this is like the best story,
Okay.
right? So I wrote Born Bright in 2016,
Yeah.
right? So I was so excited. It was coming out the fall, right after the election. I was super excited. And that was the election that Trump won. Right.
Yeah.
So I had one of my first book talks the day or two after the election. And I can tell you it was the saddest thing ever. And
Yeah.
nobody came. There were like maybe 8 people in the audience. But at that very same time, J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy was
Mm.
also released. And we were both telling these really compelling stories of
Yeah.
this hard scrabble life from like, from the something to nothing to something in America. But we, we very similar experiences, but we came out in terms of our diagnosis and very, very, very opposite ends of the
Mm.
spectrum. Like, I was saying that the systems were broken, it wasn't the people, and I shouldn't be the only one who gets to make it to the other side.
Mhm.
He came out that said, no, it's the people. he, it's his uncle, it's his grandfather. It's, the people are broken, not the
Yeah.
systems, because he was able to navigate it successfully. But he also had a lot of disdain for, his community and his family members. And in that moment, his analysis, his diagnosis, the grievance, the resentment, the pull yourselves up for by the bootstrap, that narrative had a lot of currency in
Yeah.
2016 after Trump was elected.
Mm-hmm.
And JD Vance rode that wave because both Republicans as well as liberals really embraced that narrative. Republicans were seeing it as validation for Trump's rise to power, and liberals were very interested in what Vance had to say because they saw it as like, oh my God, we missed something. We left white, rural Appalachian people behind. And so both groups were clamoring. Um, the other narrative, my narrative about systems being broken, people being left behind, that narrative wasn't as powerful or as potent. And fast forward to today, um, the narrative that has taken hold, that is still there, is that it is the individuals and the people who are broken and need to be fixed, need to work harder, are living off the system,
Mm.
um, leeches, or we're gonna make sure that nobody gets anything for free, and that is one, it's not accurate, but also it is antithetical to democracy and building a country where everyone thrives, and that regardless of race, class, everybody has their basic social needs, their basic needs met.
Yeah.
And so and I think what we're seeing now is very cruel. It's very inhumane, and but I do think it's part of a larger vision of conservatives or Republicans, but it's also a way of seeing humanity, and that we're seeing us as disconnected rather than connected.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just, yeah. Yeah, I felt very much that his approach was sort of, yeah, climb over the people that are broken to get out. Whereas another way of looking at it is reach down and help the people and help change the system. Because no matter how determined, dedicated, passionate you are, if the system's working against you, it just makes it 10 times harder than it needs to be, really. And some form of equality
Well,
will be a positive, only possibly be a positive.
yeah, and I just want to say, and one of my colleagues, Bridget Schild from the Better Life Lab, always points out that everybody depends on the government.
Yeah.
So not just poor people,
Yeah.
wealthy people, corporations,
Yeah.
everybody. In cities, everybody depends on local, state, and federal government, no matter who you are.
Mm.
But the poor people are the ones that we demonize for accessing services and programs. Um, and corporations and wealthy people, we don't do that in the same way. We laud them for being smart, for being able to how to figure out how to use the system to their advantage. uh, and so there's these two very parallel narratives happening about government, and who it works for and who it benefits.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that point you made at the beginning about having a voice. Because I mean, most people, well, people with an interest watched the inauguration, and you sort of went around the room, and it was tech bro, tech bro, tech bro, right wing podcaster, tech bro's girlfriend. Right, it was literally people that were. I guess their call on the government is to lower taxes, reduce any inhibition to growth, innovation, whatever. And they're sort of taking it that way. But yeah, there was nobody there that was going to be wanting to reach out and get part of a Head Start program or get part of a food stamps, whatever. They weren't represented. So the voice of the very, very few, maybe for the first time in history, completely outweighs the voice of the very, very many. Because it is a, we know the disparity between the richest 1% and the poorest 99% is staggeringly unequal. And I think that's just something that the governments encourage, really, with the way that lobbying works, with the way that funding political parties works. All of those things are they're such an anathema to how we are in the UK. Because in the UK, each party gets given a sum of money by the government to go and try and win. It's not about them raising money at balls or getting 100 million from a tech guy or whatever. It just doesn't work that way. But obviously they're going to want something back for their money. Nobody just throws money at something for nothing. And it does skew where government's focus is, I guess. One of the things that I don't know whether enjoy is the right word, but one of the things that I found really interesting, I read your research about gender pay gap, and I'm sure a lot of people will think that the gender pay gap has closed dramatically. It doesn't really exist anymore. It's not legal to pay women less than men, etc. But we both know that, better than me, that the gender pay gap still exists to a huge degree. And I just wondered if you could sort of highlight some of the misconceptions people still have about this gender pay gap that you encounter.
Well, I think the number one misconception about the gender pay gap is that it doesn't exist, and that women, because they have caretaking responsibilities, are forced or leave the workforce because of motherhood or because of children, that they're making that choice. Like they're choosing indirectly to be paid less by making these other kinds of choices. Yeah. And that's completely wrong. It's BS. In a very non-technical term. And so that's probably the biggest misconception that people have, is that, and when I speak to or on panels with or at a congressional hearing on the topic, the counterpoint to the pay gap is that, well, women are choosing this. Like, women leave the workforce. Like, what do they expect? When they come back, they earn less. But the other thing is, I think that is really important to know is, well, two things actually, is that, women can lose up to $1 million over their career to the pay gap. And that's real hard cash out of their pockets and out of the, out of their lives. Even, I've already, I'm mid-career, I've lost probably a significant chunk of earnings to the pay gap. And I don't think about it because it's money I don't have. But when we calculate the losses, we see that it delays things like home ownership, or, paying off debt, starting a business, paying for college for my children. Like, all those things become that much harder, or I have to put in that much more effort. Another point I'd like to make about it is that, women now are, many women are the primary breadwinners and earners in their family. And most families, even if women are not the primary breadwinner in the family, cannot sustain themselves on one income alone. So when we think about the pay gap, it's not only hurting women, yes, in their earnings, but it also is hurting families and men. We tend to sort of not think about the pay gap having an impact on men, but it does, because men are a part of families, and we're talking about dual income families. And so, again, being able to make that connection more clearly, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. And my fear, I don't know what you think about this, is that, yes, we've had the challenge with women becoming pregnant, having children, and taking time off to look after them, etc. And that's been part of the pay gap driver that's been talked about. But I think now what we're seeing is we obviously have an aging population, and it tends to be dramatically focused on expecting women to stop work to look after their parents, their in-laws, their aging relatives. So it feels, if anything, it's going to get worse in a way, because you've got squeeze at one end, and then suddenly got the squeeze at the other end, because people are living longer but not necessarily healthier. And as healthcare gets challenged, there's more expectation that you care for people at home because you can't afford to put them into a home. And then that, again, it typically isn't the man that gives up their job to go and look after the mother-in-law or the father-in-law. It tends to be the woman. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Yeah. So caregiving. So
Mm.
one of the caregiving. So women are caught in a double bind. Women and families are caught in a double bind where they're raising children,
Yeah.
but also are with an aging population are also responsible for caring for aging relatives. And caring for aging relatives is hard in general. But when you layer on health challenges and the cost
Yeah.
of care, that really burdens families significantly. And in the US, when you think about all the cuts to Medicaid, which um, Medicaid right now is responsible for 70% of the cost for nursing home care for families,
Mm-hmm.
which can reach thousands. The cost is thousands of dollars per month. And what's, you know, what is a middle income family supposed to do? They're paying for childcare on on one hand, which is, you know, 30% higher than it was before the pandemic. And then
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out how to care for an aging relative or their mother or and it's the squeeze is just unbearable. And
Mm-hmm.
then you layer on some of the other precarious things that are happening in the environment, like inflation and raising costs of just day-to-day living and housing. And I don't understand how this is sustainable, or how we're all not saying, wait a minute, not on our watch. And I think that's probably when I think about everything that's happening, one of the things that makes me the most sad is that it's impacting all of us, whether or not we're feeling the pinch, immediately right now. But it will reach all of us at one point, all of the things that are happening in our
Yeah.
environment.
I think one of the things that clouds people's thinking in a way is that you might look at a middle income family and think, oh, that's a reasonable salary, they should be fine. But as you say, when you work out, okay, they've got the cost of 2 kids in childcare, they've got the mortgage has gone up, you've got the groceries gone up, they've got their mother-in-law on one side, father-in-law on the other side. Suddenly you look at the disposable income you have, and you haven't been frivolous with your money at all. You're literally paying for care and paying for a roof over your head, and suddenly there's no money. It's crazy that you can be earning a reasonable salary, but it's all the elements that are taken from it before you can actually start spending money on living.
Well, I mean, listen, my daughter, so I was on vacation with my daughter, and she always is very, she's 15 and a half, and so she's curious about income and earnings and wants to know how much I make, and you know, and so I showed her. I said, okay, well, this is how much, because I was like, well, maybe it's time so that
Mhm.
she understands, because she leaves the lights on every day and doesn't, you know,
I've got a
she doesn't,
15-year-old son, so I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
so like, I mean, I was like, you obviously don't understand. Like, this is like, it matters if you leave the lights on. It matters if you like, ask me to buy, this kind of yogurt and then you take one bite and never eat it again. Or like like the
Yep.
food costs, like everything. So I sat down with her and I said, okay, this is how much I earn. And so she was like, wow, that's, again, she's 15. So she's like, that's a, great salary. That's, and then I said, okay, so this is how much I earn. And these are my expenses. And then when we got to the bottom line, there was just very little left over. And I said, so you see the gap, how tight it is. And I said, so when you ask for, I don't know, this or that, you know, at the end of the month, this is all I have left. This is
Yeah.
all. And I said, one little disaster, if I need a new battery or an
Mhm.
engine, that can take me, that, puts me in the red. And I think that's the reality most families are living today. It's very precarious. And so that's what makes in the US what's happening even more problematic, because there doesn't seem to be any consideration for the squeeze that regular, everyday families are feeling. Um, and in some instances, not vocalizing,
Yeah.
not speaking up and saying, hey, this is what this will mean for us. Because again, I'm going to go back to this idea of shame,
Mm.
the shame of admitting that you are struggling, you can't make ends meet, and again, feeling like there's something wrong with you as opposed to the system that's broken or that is not working.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get people to um, either feel the shame and say something anyway, or sort of get rid of the shame so that we can really start talking about what's happening to us, then
Mm.
I think we would all be better off.
Yeah. It's similar in the UK, where I think the statistics are that the majority of people are one paycheck away from being evicted or defaulting on a mortgage. And I think there's something crazy like 35% of people have less than $200 in savings, which you're basically living life hoping that nothing goes wrong, hoping that the fridge doesn't break or the television doesn't break or the car needs a new carburetor or whatever. You're just hoping that, because as soon as you might have 1 month where the fridge breaks and the car breaks, so you can't get to work, and then it's so quick, and it's somebody that, again, that isn't earning a terrible salary, but is just living check to check, paycheck to paycheck, and then when those things happen, oh my goodness, yeah, what
Um,
on earth do you do?
Yeah, and I think that, like, I just think that, like, I've always advocated for a social safety net
Hmm.
that anybody can tap into, not just low income or poor people. That because again, if it's the case that most middle class families are one paycheck away from being poor, then when we saw that during the pandemic, then it would
Yeah.
make sense that a social safety net that is not income driven, that you don't have to be poor 200% below the poverty line, but anybody can tap into, makes more sense, which
Mm.
is happening in other countries. And just another anecdote, I'm a single mother by choice, and so I rely a lot on babysitters,
Mhm.
like, care when I have to work or travel. And so I had this long term babysitter who was, barely making ends meet, going to a community college, so she, had to drive there every day. And then one day she, came, and I think her car broke down and she couldn't get there. And she said, I don't know if it was brakes or something. It was a minor repair. It was maybe $500. And she said, I can't afford to get it. And I'm going to have to drop out of school because I can't do it. And I gave her the money so that she could get the repair so that she could get back and forth to school. And she reaches out to me from time to time. She no longer babysits, and she's doing well, she's thriving. But it was just that sort of, that human compassion, but also, what would have happened if I hadn't been able to do that. Again, the social safety net, she shouldn't have to rely on the kindness of a stranger, pretty much. But
Mm.
that social safety net is really important, especially if we talk about wanting people to be self-sufficient and access opportunity. Well, the social safety net is a big part of that. Um, that scaffolding.
Yeah, and on all the economic intelligence and all the sensible rationale in the world is that the lady you were kind enough to help, and basically you've changed her life, basically. You kind enough to help. So that $500 is going to come back to the government many, many, many times over, and in the increased taxes she'll pay throughout her career. If she'd had to drop out of college, she might have ended up working at, I don't know, McDonald's or Dairy Queen or whatever. And who knows? And she's on a sort of a basic wage, and she's paying that back. But going through college, who knows what she'll be doing in 10 years' time? But she will be paying more tax. So it's always. I've always struggled with the notion that we invest so little at early and crucial stages of life, but we end up having to spend so much money on our judicial system, on our prisons, on all these things. And if you did some of the stuff earlier on and just spent some of the money and pull the money forward, but we, I don't know whether it's just a capitalist thing that we find the money when it's needed. So for prisons, judicial systems, punishments, whatever, rather than spending it beforehand and investing it in schools and in events like this, I know that probably sounds like woo-woo land, but it just you know what I mean. It's just so crazy that if we'd given I don't know every student $20,000 when they left college, that's $20,000 to you've got to invest half of it, you can spend half of it, whatever. In 50 years' time, that's such a different outcome than leave college or leave high school or don't finish high school and get on with your life. It just feels such a mismatch as to where the money ends up going. But yeah.
I mean, again, it is a mismatch, but you also have to think about, like who's winning, who is benefiting from the criminal justice system, for example, like prisons and stuff. So, and I used to teach a course at Georgetown University on the criminal justice system and women, but these are all private prisons.
Yeah.
So there's if we follow the money, there are people who are benefiting from the lack of investments up front, and that's the issue, because, for example, if there was no incentive or payout or pay up for private prisons or some of these other punitive systems, then there wouldn't be the divestment and these other things like the education system. Like it is very very much connected, or the disinvestment in the social safety net or mental health services as well, because we've divested from those stripped resources from those programs as well. But if we look at where we are putting the money and who's benefiting from that, we can see there's a clear dotted line to that, and the few, what we talked about earlier about the few at the top who were benefiting. And for me, this is not an anti-capitalist argument, or because we do this that's how our economy works. For me, this is an argument or a conversation about humanity. This is and talking about return on investment. This is talking about how do we build a whole and complete society where everybody has their basic needs met. That's what this conversation is about, not whether or not we're veering off to socialism or some other communism.
A long way away from that.
That's where it always goes. We're like, oh, you just want, and it's like, no, that's not where I'm going. That's not it. I'm very clear that we live in a very capitalist society, but the kind of society that the kind of capitalism that we're running right now is only benefiting the few at the top. It's not equitable, it's unfair, and it's unjust.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that shocked us over here, I think, and probably shocked, even though you're close to it in the US, was the sort of sweeping repeal or repudiation of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging policies. And it's really disappointing me. Yes, the government's a government, but so many private businesses have just scrapped positions and right, no, we're not doing that anymore. And I don't think it needs to be that intelligent to know there is still a big issue globally with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how do we get people to recognize there is still this huge disparity, that women of color are affected disproportionately, that men of color are far more likely to go to prison or have a lower high school rating or whatever. And then we sort of sweep away anything that sort of was in place to try and make things equitable. And it wasn't about giving people a leg up. It was like, well, let's just try and get things equitable. But why has that been allowed in a way? And I'm not blaming you, but why has it been allowed? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think the answer is it's both simple and complex. I think the corporations and businesses who abandoned um, diversity, equity, inclusion, which is just shorthand for, um, an inclusive workforce, um, making sure that those who have been locked out of opportunity, whether it's women, whether it's Blacks, Latinos, LGBTQ people, have an opportunity to participate and to demonstrate um, their skills and talents, because that's not always been the case. And when I think about how some companies and corporations so easily abandon what they said were their principles and their values,
Yeah.
what that tells me is that those were never your values. Those were never your um, that was never your commitment. You were driven by profit and your bottom line and what you believed made you look good in the public eye. And so that's the first thing. So I would say that these companies were never committed to building a diverse and inclusive workforce in the first place, because the first opportunity you have to abandon it, you did. And okay, and this the second thing is, I just feel like we're living in a moment where um, and I think it coincides with the rise of Donald Trump to power, but living in a very individualistic, very me um, society, or as opposed to, so people are sort of more concerned with what do I get out of this? How does this benefit me?
Yeah.
As opposed to the collective good or the collective will. We've lost the collective good, or what benefits the whole. And we saw this in the voting patterns. Like, people were really, this year, when they were voting and casting their vote, um, um, thinking about, like, what's in it for me? What is Trump going to do for me
Yeah.
specifically? They weren't concerned about, like, whether or not he was going to do mass deportations. They were like, well, he said he's going to do this for me. uh, and so and women too.
Mhm.
And so um, and so I think that that's very bad for democracy. I think it's very bad for it's very bad for democracy. It's bad for communities. It's bad for trust. I just think that we're in a really bad place, and I actually don't know how we get out of it, how we get back to a place where we're focused more on the collective good and the collective will, because that right now is being framed as a weaker position, like a weakness, like
Yeah.
caring about other people, caring about what happens to your neighbor, what happens to um, people who don't look like you. That has become a weak position, or you're considered naive, uh, and that was not the case before. I mean, even with the pandemic, like, let me just say this: if we had a pandemic in 2025, it would be pandemonium for sure, because in 2020 there was this idea that we were all in this together.
Yeah.
It was a collective.
Mhm.
We were doing something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
We were saving our neighbors. We were wearing masks for a purpose. If that happened today, everybody would die. I mean, clearly, we'd all be dead, because that is just not how, um, you know, how we're seeing things. That's not the politic. That is not the body politic right
Mm.
now.
Yeah, they wouldn't close anything now. Everything would just
No,
keep
everybody
going.
would be
It'd all be
like,
about the
I
economy.
mean, we would all,
Yeah.
it, it would have, so that's, that kind of stuff really, I mean, um, I think what I immediately go to is like, well, how do we get out of this? How do we create like not just a shift in me, but a collective shift?
Mm.
And we haven't figured that out. We're trying to figure that out, and but as we're figuring it out, things are happening. Um,
Yes. Yeah. This is it, and I think there can be a huge amount of criticisms about Donald Trump, and there are many criticisms, but it's still staggering that he managed to convince people in poverty, people, blue collar workers, etc., that he's one of them in a way and understands them better than anybody else can. Oh, I'm not part of the political elite. I'm just one of you. And there's a multi-billionaire, married 3 times, whatever, 10 kids, bankrupt 4 times, found guilty of terrible crimes, and still people decided to think, no, all right, he's gonna give me something, and that's almost a fear. If that kind of approach can get you elected, then where do you go? Does the other side try and go as extreme, but the other way, or it just feels it'd be very interesting to see how the political landscape carries on in the US at the next election and the next election after that. It just feels very challenging to see a different path forward.
yeah, it's just I can't I don't know um how we get out from under it,
Hmm.
because that's what it feels like. It's something to get out from under. Like, how do
Yeah,
we, get to the other side? Um, Part of me thinks that the only way, you've probably heard this, the only way through out is through. Like, you have to
yeah,
go through it. You
yeah.
can't get around it. Um, and so, what does it mean to go through it? Like,
Hmm.
what does it mean to do that work to get to, um, back to
Yeah,
a collective, like a collective good or collective will or the will of the majority. um and I think that's the biggest question on the table for all of us. I think, Democrats are trying to figure it out, but I think even everyday people, regular people, are trying to figure out, like,
yeah,
because I think this feels off to most people. I don't think, although some people are, embracing, like you said, Trumpism, or, very, MAGA
hmm
centered, centric. Uh, but pretty much half the country, actually, if we were going to be
yeah,
honest about it.
yeah.
Uh, but, to me, I personally believe that, like, I'm okay if you personally have opinions or feel a particular way about, I don't know, blacks, women, like, you're entitled to your personal beliefs.
Hmm.
And my issue is when those beliefs bleed into policy, bleed into violence,
Yeah.
bleed into the body politic. Like, that's when I have an issue. So I do not believe that all of a sudden half the country became racist, homophobic. Like, I believe people there, they were there all along, but they were not allowed or able to seize the government,
Yeah.
and put those beliefs into action. Now, that to me is a problem and undemocratic.
Mm.
So, and so, and that's where we are right now. So like, you have those, people who have those kinds of beliefs, and really feel aggrieved, um, and vengeful, exacting revenge, and creating bad policy as a result of those biases. And I think that's what's
Mm.
getting us in trouble right now.
Mm. Would you ever want to be a senator, or would you just find it too frustrating?
Hmm?
Would you ever want to be a senator, or would you find it
Oh
too
no.
frustrating?
Oh no. I just
No.
no, I mean, not because first of all, those used to be good jobs. Being a
Yeah.
senator, being a
Mm.
Congress elected person, I mean, you were revered, you were a
Yeah.
statesman. I mean, now, I mean, it's just who
Yeah.
are these people?
Yeah. No. I know.
I mean, they're characters, they're personalities. They want to be famous. They want, a platform.
Yeah.
And so they're doing their individual bidding, what they want, as opposed to like what their constituencies want or
Mm.
need. And so, in that sense, I think public office or serving the public, no longer is not what it used to be, like a calling. Um, and again, I'm hoping we can get back to some sort of decorum there because I mean, the UFC wrestlers on the White House lawn, the memes, the fighting, even by Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah.
Democrats
Yeah.
are not excluded from this. There are some profile Democrats, in my opinion, who are just as problematic as Republicans in terms of their posture and demeanor and their fighting and their adversarialness. So it's a problem on both sides.
Mm.
But I do think that we need to get back to going back to what you said at the beginning of the conversation, the give and take,
Mm.
because again, as a political scientist and as a person who believes in democracy, um, I do think healthy debate, healthy compromise, nuance, give, take, is a part of the democratic process. That's what it should be. So I don't have like Republicans like smaller government, they're, traditional conservatism,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, listen, let's do it. You do that. I'll be this over here. I'll be asking for more social programs. You'll be saying, no, let's watch the budget and we'll meet somewhere in the middle.
Mm.
That's government. What we have right now is something that I don't even recognize.
No, that's the problem now. Is that there's that sort of chasm in the middle. Really, I mean, I am very nerdy, and I really love watching the Senate hearings or committees and things, and I watch them voraciously on YouTube, etc. And maybe it's almost you're looking at it in the best possible way of looking at it, a bit of a freak show in a way, because what you have is something that isn't possible in human life, where you have half of the people are completely over here, and the other half are completely over there, and they're just no matter one will say black and the other will say white, one will say hot, the other will say cold. There's nobody. I've never heard anybody say, yeah, that's actually a good point. And I watch, Ted Cruz or Senator Haley, and I look at Antonio and all of them, and I think, my goodness, you just completely opposed to one another. I find that staggering that there's not somebody that will say, yeah, okay. And my hope is that things are better off camera when they're in small committees and there's 7 or 9 of them and they're discussing things and things get progressed more eloquently. But as you say, it almost feels that they are rehearsing for a career as a reality TV star or something else, that they're not actually in it for long term. They're not a sort of think of it what you will, not a Joe Biden or a character that has literally given a whole life to politics. That they're something very, very different. There are a couple of other things I wanted to ask. I know I've taken up a lot of time already. Sorry, but if you've got a bit more time.
Oh yeah, I have more time.
Fabulous. So it's really interesting. My daughter's 18 and she's finished school, so hopefully she's going to college in the fall to do philosophy and ethics as a topic. And you spoke about something that and it's very apt for Madeline. So you talked about the gift of being difficult and the power of disruption. And I think she would certainly put a hand up to both of those in the most positive way. And I just wondered if you could talk to the value of being difficult, I guess, / non-conforming, and a willingness to disrupt, particularly in college-age students. Or my son's 15, so that sort of age, I want them to be out there disrupting and disagreeing with me. They shouldn't disagree with what I say. I'm an old fart now. What are you thinking? How do we get across to young people that, yeah, you've got all the thoughts in the world in your head, just let them out sometimes?
So, I personally am very saddened by what's happening, I think, with young people, because young people are, I remember myself when I was 19, 20 years old, and how idealistic I was, and how contrary, you're just trying to figure out who you are, how you should think about things. And some of it is right, and some of it you're just a knucklehead, and it's great, it's amazing. And also, when we think socially, it's also a time, and when you're 18, 19, 20, where you're figuring out your politics, you're getting involved. Like,
Yeah.
I went to any protest. Like, it could be anything, we could be and it was fun, it was harmless. You were out there with young people protesting. I don't know, it could be anything. Immigration. I remember protesting IMF, and it felt so fun, and I was just, it was great. And what makes me so sad now is that young people who are exercising that right and pushing back and questioning authority, or saying, hey, why does it have to be this way? We don't like this. They're being squelched. They're being punished. They're being deported. I mean, in the U.S.
Yeah.
And that is what makes me very, very, very sad, because the students, the young people, that's where the revolutions and the social change, that is where it happens. And, if you ask me, I'm just speaking about in the US, I think Donald Trump knows that. I think he knows that young people, you know, are the ones who will stand up, because they don't have anything to lose.
Yes.
And they are
Mhm.
idealistic in a way that, we are not no longer. And so when I hear about your daughter, and especially women, like the idea that um, you can create a life on your own terms, or you can choose differently, or you can say, why does it have to be that way? I want to do it this way. The courage and the bravery to be able to do that, I think, is really very important. But, for young people, especially young women, there's not a lot of reward to that. There's still a lot of stigma. But
Mm.
speaking as a person who has charted a life on her own terms, I think it's really very, very much, worth it. And so, but the thing I know for sure is that young people will always be young people, and they will always push back and be difficult, and that's what makes me happy. But for women and young women, I think that it's a harder road.
It is, but an example my daughter and I talked about it the other day was that in the UK we had the suffragettes, women that sort of that protested both legally and illegally at the time to get women to vote, and that was less than 100 years ago. Women even had the vote in the UK, and it was only like 1930s where all women got the vote. So it's insane. But if they hadn't protested and hadn't done the things that they'd done, that wouldn't have come about. So yeah, the power of protest is one that I fear in the UK, especially, is being dramatically restricted by government. So everything has to be pre-approved. Any gathering of more than 6 people can be dispersed. All of these things that sort of limit meaningful protest is really, really hard, I think, because yeah, change only comes about when, like as you say, when young people decide that this doesn't feel right. And on one hand, they look at social media and think social media is so powerful because it can connect people from all over the world into this cause or this focus. And then I think it's so destructive in that it takes up so much of people's time with with nonsense when they could be actually out doing something. Yeah, social media feels like an incredible It's an incredible thing. I'm just not sure whether it's good or bad. I don't know whether in 10 years' time we'll look at it the same way we looked at smoking and think, how could we ever smoked? How do we view social media? Do you know what I mean? It can bring people into your talks. It can bring people to listen to you. It can watch you on YouTube. It's amazing. But then so much of it is just dragging people into people that think the same as they do, because people have a confirmation bias and want to be around people that say the same things that they say, and it blocks us off from exploring voices that we wouldn't have heard normally. I've no idea what the question is there, but just my social
No,
media story.
well, I mean, I guess maybe the question is social media good or bad?
Mm.
And I think that it depends, because sometimes social media is like a leveling, like it gives it's like
Yeah,
it's equal opportunity. So like if you have something to say, you can just hop on and
yeah,
say it.
yeah.
And and that's a good thing. So like
Hmm.
there's different and diversity of voices. I think the bad part of social media is that um, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation floating around, and it lends itself to tribalism, or just
Yeah,
going, through algorithm, being fed the same information that confirms your own, biases, and there are no facts. It's not ground. It's really emotional and opinion based.
mm,
Um, and also sometimes ahistorical. So that for a young person is really dangerous, especially if they haven't developed critical thinking skills, or um, a level of discernment about who they are, their identity, or like, who am I? So,
yeah,
because again, young
yeah.
people are figuring out, like, well, who am I? Like, do I believe this? Do I want to, And a lot of it is really persuasive information. And again,
Absolutely.
um, so and so so I agree that social media, it can be really good, but I think also there are some things about it that makes it really hard to be a young person right now.
Mm,
A generation ago, um, you relied on traditional media, big media, for all of your news, and there was a standard, a journalistic standard, in terms of the facts,
yeah.
and objectivity, and that's just no longer the case. And
No.
so that's but and studies show that most young people are getting their information not from the bigger legacy news outlets, which are problematic right now, but
Yeah.
they're getting it from social media,
Mm.
which is, I don't know.
And
So
that brings me on to the next thing, I guess, is then we're increasingly seeing stories and feeds and accounts being wholly AI generated, created, shared, etc. And this is sorry, I want to apologize for asking this, but where, where do you stand on AI? Is that, does it bring hope for individuals, for groups, and for the economy, or do you think AI is a more of a challenge than an opportunity?
I do think it's an opportunity. So all of these
Mhm.
things are opportunities. It's how we use it, how
Yeah,
we frame it. Again, I may be dating myself, but I remember before the internet, and I remember my one of my teachers. She told us the internet was going to be so bad, we're going to turn into
right.
robots. Just, and it turned out to be one of the greatest inventions of the 21st century, and really it advanced us technologically. But as you know, that there's a dark side.
Yeah,
And so I feel the same way about AI, and how it's being used, again, being used in these very dark ways, like to spread mis and disinformation,
yeah,
making, um, because it's generative. So,
mhm,
like, once you put false information on the internet, that's what gets pulled back when you
yeah,
are generating information from AI. And so, the you know what is happening is that there's a mesh between fact and fiction, or what's false, or like disinformation, and truth and fact, and but you're getting all of that back now. If you're a person, I just, maybe 2 weeks ago, I just wanted full disclosure, just started use Chat GPT for the first time.
Mhm.
And because I was the person who said, no, that's just cheating, you don't use that, so, but I wanted to, see
Mm.
what was going on. So, and again, you get all this information back, but you, the person, the human, has to be able to discern and sift through the information. And if you can't do that, you're unable to do that, you don't have the critical skills to do that, I think that's what makes it more dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, and not a tool,
Mm.
because anything is a tool. AI is a tool,
Absolutely.
right? So it's how you use it. So,
Mm.
but you hear these stories where um, senators and congressional people are using AI to do research and come up with bills, and half the facts are wrong, or the
Yeah.
citations are wrong, and so that can't be right. So like that can't be a good use of AI.
No,
Um,
it is amazing. So, ChatGPT is something it isn't very clever. It's very conversational. So you can feel that you're talking to almost a person that cares really. But I found in using it that it does make some mistakes. And when you tell it it's made a mistake, it apologizes. It says it will never happen again, and yeah, it makes them again. But it
See,
is
I've
it
never.
is it does it apologize. I mean, I've had it sort of saying this will never happen again. I promise you, I'll commit to that deadline. Then the deadline goes past, it hasn't delivered something. I know this is inexcusable. I won't let you down again. It's almost like you're talking to somebody at work. It's really, really odd sensation.
I
But
see.
then
I
it
haven't
goes
gotten
on.
down that rabbit hole where,
Yeah,
but again, I'm reading these articles now.
yeah.
I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. Well, people are proposing to AI bots, or like, it's just.
There was a big piece. There was a big article in one of the UK broadsheets called The Guardian, and they had a big article last weekend about people marrying their AI bots.
Yeah.
They've
So like,
never
where
never had somebody that
connection
never
around
had somebody
here?
that's as agreeable. Most women in my life are argumentative. The ChatGPT agrees with me. That's what you want. Then I guess it's yeah, but it's kind of weird, really. So two more questions, and these are probably the hardest ones. So what what do you see as your next 5 years looking like? Is it possible to answer that question?
Yeah, I think the next 5 years for me. Well, I have a lot, that I'm working on, but
Mhm.
also, personally. So, in 5 years, I hope that collectively we're all in a different place. Like we are all on the other side, and we've gotten back we gotten to a place where we are again concerned about the collective good, the
Yeah,
majority, what we all need. So I hope for my children's future, who they're, your children are on the cusp of adulthood
mm,
as well, that they are going to inherit a world or a place, whether it's the UK or the United States, where they feel that they are one, connected to their community, their neighbors, and they feel a part of something larger or bigger. Um, so, I hope that we're in that place in 5 years. Professionally, I hope um, that I'm in a place, or we're in a place where that voices like mine, voices like yours, are centered once again, that there is rationality, there is care, there is empathy, there is
mm,
compassion, and that the work that I do and the work that you do, we can do it in a bigger way. Right now, it feels like my work has gotten um, more narrow, just because of the atmosphere.
yeah,
And so, what I'm looking for to the next 5 years is an expansion of my work. Um, I'm working on a book. I'm working on Hopefully, Born Bright will become either a miniseries or a feature film. So I'm working on that as well. So there are really great things, but all the stuff that I work about and care about, and the reception of it really depends on people being connected and seeing humanity for what it is. Like, you know, it depends on connection.
Mm.
And your work depends on connection and people being able to see the humanity of others. And so, what I'm hoping that is in 5 years professionally, that there we will be in a place where we can do that
Mm.
once more.
I hope so. That's one of the things that upsets me the most at the moment is that empathy is increasingly seen as a weakness again. And I think we got to a point where being able to understand somebody else and understand their position, I really believe and believe is an absolute superpower. Imagine being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and know what they're feeling and how they're thinking about something. It's incredible power. But yeah, the way things are at the moment, it's almost as if no, dismiss that. Just focus on you and yourself. And it's amazing. I was just thinking, and so in 5 or 6 years' time, your daughter and my son, all being well, we'll be finishing college. It's amazing how quick that time horizon shrinks. When I can still remember when Alexander was first day at school and stuff. And it's it's. I'm sure you're the same. It goes very very quickly. And then the final question. I think this is really, really relevant to you more than anybody else I've talked to. So, you are in a position where you will hear some very challenging stories. You'll experience some very challenging days. You'll have people that you deal with that are in difficulty, or people that you talk to, people that reach out to you, etc. And I just wondered, how do you avoid, in the best possible way, becoming burdened with the sort of trauma of life? How do you protect your own mental, I guess, and physical well-being? How do you nourish yourself?
Oh, well, listen, despite everything that's going on, I have to say I feel very grateful and I feel like I'm living a good life. I feel very fortunate for my life. I have a great partner. I have two beautiful children. I have a beautiful home. I have my basic needs met, and so I feel very. I feel I feel good. I feel I have my mental capacity so I can continue to do my work. Um, you know, and I think reminding myself of that daily
Mm.
is really very important.
Hmm.
And taking stock, I think, is really important. And also remembering, I've been doing this kind of work, focused writing and thinking about social inequality and the gaps for a very long time. And I told my friend, I said, well, we've been doing this work. I said, but I have to ask myself, like, what is this for? Like, what is the end? Like, what do we want at the end of all of this? And she was like, wow, that's a really good question. I said, yeah, what do you think you want? What do you think this is all about? And I said, for me, it's about joy. It's about, um, feeling free in my body, being healthy, my children being healthy. And so, um, and also for other people to be able to experience that too. So not
Yeah.
just for me, but for other people too. And so, to that end, I try to go back and live in those moments of joy and like small things, um, that's really important to me. And I've also, and I don't know if, whoever's listening, um, I used to be a news junkie. I watch news in the morning and then the afternoon, and then I'm scrolling and reading articles. And like you said, you watching the Senate hearings. And I actually had to cut back on that
Hmm.
because it was just too toxic. Toxic is the right word for this moment in this atmosphere. And I tune in when I need to know something or want to understand something. But ingesting all of that every day, 24 hours a day is not good, but
Yeah.
also very harmful. So those are the ways, I've been sort of coping in this moment, but also being able to move forward. Like I can't write and like dream while being inundated with, I mean, goodness, I turned on the news yesterday for like 10 minutes and I said, wow, I
Yeah.
got to get out of here. Because
Yeah.
there's fires, there's this, I was just like,
Mm.
oh my goodness. So that's how I'm staying sane, I think, and I garden. I love to
Oh,
garden.
nice. It's,
So
it's something about yeah, a patch of land. You do something to it, and it changes. You literally can see. I'm still staggered. You see these amazing trees and plants. It's tiny little seed they come from. I think that's staggering, really.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
just, and
that's cool.
I taught myself how to garden. I feel like I'm a damn good gardener now. So like I love watching, things grow from a little seed,
Hmm.
and it's also a metaphor for like the work that I'm doing. So like
Absolutely.
watching something from a small seed grow to something really beautiful and nourish.
You're doing great stuff. We just need more of you, really. Hopefully, our children will follow in your footsteps. Yeah, get the voices out there. Thank you so much. You give me so much time, so much to think about. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been really great. I really enjoyed this conversation. Our conversation.